We're now going to move on to transitional period. Stephen Kinnock, over to you.
Thank you very much, Hello Minister. In her Florence speech, the Prime Minister said that the existing structure of EU rules and regulations would apply during an implementation period of around 2 years. Do you agree with that statement, and do you agree then that it would apply to all of the issues we're discussing today? That it, in essence, it's a continuation of the status quo?
Save for the fact, and I think it's important to reflect on this, yes, I absolutely agree that an implementation period, particularly when it comes to looking at new immigration rules, is necessary. But the Prime Minister's been very clear that EU citizens coming here during that implementation period will be expected to register. But, yeah, I mean, I think it is going to take us in the region of 2 years to get the EU citizens through the settled status scheme and registered, and I think it's important that we allow ourselves adequate time to do that.
Why do you think it is then that, I think it was in China, the Prime Minister seemed to be rowing back from the statement she made in the Florence speech, where she said that people who came when we were still a member of the EU had certain expectations, but now those who come after March 2019, it will be different because it will be coming to a UK they know will be outside the EU. But doesn't that contradict directly the statement she made in the Florence speech that there will be a continuation of EU rules and regulations?
I think she was very clear that we will require time to implement these changes, but equally on the 29th of March next year we are leaving the EU. And anybody who comes here after that time, I do not think it is unreasonable that they will know that we have left the EU and to have different expectations than those who will have come here under free movement. And so I think it is important that we have enough time, and particularly when it comes to implementing new immigration policies, when it comes to making sure that we have those 3 million or so citizens registered, it is going to take time.
Obviously, the existing rules and regulations includes the 2004 Free Movement Directive. So we have to assume, based on what the Prime Minister said in Florence, that the 2004 Free Movement Directive would apply lock, stock and barrel throughout the transition period. That includes building up residency rights. So the 2004 Directive explicitly allows the building up of residency rights. And therefore, any time that an EU citizen spends in the UK during the transition period would contribute to their residency rights. Do you agree with that?
I think this is absolutely something that is a matter for the future negotiations.
But in her China statement, the Prime Minister seemed to be explicitly saying that that would not be the case, that the period in the UK during the transition period should not contribute to the building up of residency rights, because she made that point about the expectation of the citizen when they came based on the political situation in the UK.
I think it is reasonable to say that anybody who comes here post the 29th of March next year will not have the same expectations as somebody who is covered by this withdrawal agreement. However, I'm very conscious that there are differences of views between ourselves and the European Union, and those are matters for negotiation.
But Minister, I'm just a little bit confused about this, because you said that you think the 2004 Free Movement Directive should apply throughout the transition period.
I don't think I did say that.
Did you not?
No.
Oh, sorry, then I misunderstood. But the Prime Minister said in Florence, in effect, she was saying the 2004 Free Movement Directive should apply, because the Prime Minister said in terms that the existing rules and regulations must apply during the transition period.
So during the transition period, we absolutely expect and want EU nationals to be able to come here, live here, work here. However, as she has been very clear, the Prime Minister said they will have different expectations to those who are here pre the 29th of March. They will have arrived after we have left the EU, but these are absolutely matters for future negotiation.
But they're not really, because the 2004 directive is very clear that you build residency rights for the period of time that you're in the United Kingdom, and whilst we will have left the EU on the 29th of March, we will in effect be in a standstill position. It'll be a carbon copy of the status quo as confirmed in the negotiating directives for this period of the talks. So the critical point here is, do you or do you not agree that EU citizens that are here during the transition period, whilst they're here, that period should contribute to the residency period in the UK as defined under the 2004 directive?
I absolutely think that that's a matter for the negotiations.
But isn't it it's a very difficult message to send to EU citizens in this country, and indeed to UK citizens, because this applies in a reciprocal manner to the 1 million odd UK citizens across the EU, that there seems to be a difference in opinion within the Prime Minister herself between what she said in Florence and what she said in China?
Well, I think the Prime Minister's been very clear. Anyone who comes here after the 29th of March will have different expectations because we will have left the EU. It is a matter for negotiations as to, and you undoubtedly will have heard the interview with Mr Verhofstadt on the television over the last weekend. The EU regard that differently. These are matters for the negotiation, and anyone who is here now is protected by the withdrawal agreement. Anyone who comes here afterwards should have different expectations.
The EU has, of course, made it very clear that the transition period will be a carbon copy of the status quo. Don't you think that the government risks looking like it's just posturing on this issue, and that it will ultimately have to back down and accept the basic premise that the Prime Minister herself set out in the Florence speech, which is that the transition period will be a carbon copy of the status quo minus our seat in the European Council and Commission and MEPs?
I think this is something for the negotiations.
Okay, thank you.
Is that the end of your line of questioning?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed.